Today we're going to be doing a recording talk for After the Flowers Pass, works by Amir Khadar, who is our solo artist right now. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the exhibition, and then I'll let Amir take it over and walk us through the space. There are also going to be some activities today, which are going to be really fun. We'll all get to know each other a little bit more. So, a little bit about the show. So, Amir Khadar is a multidisciplinary artist from Minneapolis, Minnesota, who bridges the gap between fantasy and reality and otherworldly creations. And after the Flowers Pass, I'm running out. And after the Flowers Pass, Khadar uses textiles and mixed media to construct a post-apocalyptic world that reimagines hierarchies in today's society. In this exhibition, Khadar analyzes colonial relationships between people and the environment. So I'll pass it over to Amir. You can start walking us through the show. We're going to have a Q&A at the end, so if you have any questions, just hold on to them. Let me know if you need anything.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chelsea. Well, hi, everyone. Again, my name is Amir. I use they, them pronouns, or you can also use my name. Either one works. So, to get started on these three pieces, these three were things that I developed specifically for the show, just because I had a vision of a story in three pieces that I just really wanted to get to doing, and the process was more so experimental, and I was just pulling everything that I've learned over all my years of making together to make something, just because I also wanted to see what I could do, especially when I give myself time and space and I know that it's going to end up somewhere. So these three started as digital weavings. So they all started on a computer. I drew the images digitally and then I sent them off somewhere to get printed. And I'll do a very hands-on explanation of how that process works, just because it's very abstract when I say digital weaving, especially if nobody's a fabric artist or doesn't work with textiles. But I started with that process and they came to me all in black and white. And then I used a lot of different textile techniques and coloring processes to add on color. And afterwards I did a lot of beading techniques. I've always just really resonating with beading processes, especially when I was younger, just from family dresses that I would see, they'd always be very heavily beaded and sequined and really bright colors. So I think I got a lot of sensibility from seeing my aunties and my mom dress up when I was younger. So a lot of the ways I bead are influenced by that, and I also really do like sequins because there's a lot of different histories with sequins inside of the African diaspora, but the one I think I pull on the most is Haitian voodoo flags, which is a process that, I'm not actually sure exactly where it came from. There's another process called asafo flags, which are in Ghana, but these Haitian voodoo flags are pieces of fabric that are heavily beaded, sequined, painted on, etc., and they have very high spiritual significance, and they're usually attributed to a specific deity, and they have ritual processes that surround them, and they're central in altar spaces. And the first time I saw them, I just was really entranced by the amount of time and energy that was just infused into the fabric. So I also try to pursue that with everything that I'm trying to do, just put as much energy and charge into it as possible, as much as my body will allow me, my individual body, because those things are made by a lot of people. And then asafo flags, I believe, originate in Benin, and they're a tradition of people putting fabric onto each other in applique processes. So they're cutting out pieces of fabric like collage and then creating images with those. And I have photos on my iPad, which I'll show eventually. And if there are any specific questions, I think I'm okay with questions along the way. Chelsea, do you think, or should we hold them?
Whatever, this is all.
It's all me? Okay.
You can ask all the way. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. So if there are any questions, definitely raise your hand, just because I think I glaze over things that are complicated sometimes. So if I say anything that's unclear, definitely stop me. And then I think I can get a little bit into the conceptual meaning of these pieces, what they mean. They all definitely came from just physically me being outside and sitting around and watching how people interact with their environments, and specifically in an urban environment, because a lot of the stories that I was told that I'm drawing from when I was younger, it was people inside of very natural spaces, to the point that they were integrated with their environments. There wasn't maybe a separation between a person and an animal or a person and a plant, which is also very important to what animism is, and I'll get into that soon too. But a lot of those stories don't really apply to how we live in contemporary days. So I'm just trying to find ways to bring them into contemporary knowledge and contemporary thought without compromising the really important elements of the stories. So again, animism is a really important belief in a lot of indigenous cultures globally. It doesn't really matter where you are, but it's just the belief that everything has a spiritual essence, has a spirit, is alive, doesn't necessarily breathe, and that life doesn't show up in the same way that human life does, but it just means that everything is equally alive in some way. And it influences language. Like there are some languages where in English we would say, I'm going to climb a mountain, and in a lot of languages you would say, the mountain let me climb it, or the mountain gave me permission to climb it. So it's a permissive based language, which I think is really interesting, and I just try to like depict everything in my images with equal weight. I try to at least like not just have the focus on the human figure, but like have these humans interacting in ways that are just, they're becoming a part of the environment, or like blending into the background. These three pieces, I don't know how to describe them exactly. If I was to start with this one, this is just about a feeling of having your hair touch the ground and feeling deeply connected to the ground itself. And that was like the main starting point. I titled it, Do You Speak the Language? Just because it's a very human thing to do, to lie on the ground. I don't think there's people that have not done that, but everyone has their own distinct spiritual meaning to that situation. Like there's some moments where you're lying on the ground and it does feel like the sun is smiling at you, and I just want to capture that moment. In the second one, I was thinking about ritual practices, just because I do mention in like the show description that there is a lot of apocalyptic imagery, or like my interpretation of apocalypse, just because I think the problem of my generation, like the thing that we're gonna have to solve and get over at some point, is climate change. And it's one of like the main things that we speak about, and it shapes a lot of our fears. So a lot of the pieces are also me trying to rationalize how to deal with climate change and how to not like slip into climate doomism, which I don't think is productive, but it's not bad if you do that. The last piece I called Snowbirds, which I don't know if that's a statement that everyone uses, but in Minneapolis, it gets really cold in the winter, like really, really, really cold, like unfathomably cold. So a person who's a snowbird is someone who escapes that cold and flies somewhere warm during the winter. So I just called it that because I was thinking about like what are ways to escape a burning planet. And I use the image of a snake because in a lot of West African traditional religions, the snake is the creator deity. And it was like the first creature that existed on the planet, and it created the planet that we live on. So that's also why I use snakes a lot, not just because they're pretty, even though I do like snakes a lot, but specifically it's that tied to spiritual practices. And yeah, I'll leave it there for now on this. Are there any questions?
Do you choose the color with this process before? Like, is there a possibility to try blues or yellows and then change it if it's not doing what you want it to do?
With this process specifically, it's a lot harder because this is very hands-off.
Yeah.
In some of the pieces that are like in other places, the process was a lot more hands-on, and I was actually weaving the fabric myself, so I could pick what threads I was using, and I knew like if this thread would bleach or if it would take dye well, so I could make those decisions afterwards. And then on a piece back there is a good place to explain that whole process, because I did a lot of things afterwards because I didn't like my choices. But with this type, I did bleach these circles because I knew what there's something called the burn test, like you can burn fabric to figure out what it is, and that's kind of the only way to figure out what fabric is. And it was at least mostly something plant-based. So I bleached it a little bit. I knew it wasn't animal, because that you can't bleach animal fabrics. But yeah, I would say that for now.
And I have kind of a follow-up question. Is there a reason you chose these specific colors, like green and orange, and these kind of teals and yellows, or is it just whatever spoke to you?
I think it was at first whatever spoke. I do love the color green. It's my favorite color. So I think a lot of the time when I was working on this, I just wanted to make something really pretty. My brain wasn't on in all the ways. Like I was just like, what's beautiful? And and it was like leaves and green things.
Yeah.
In the middle piece, I did want to evoke some type of like feeling of urgency or fire. And at the end, I also wanted to have like those two contrasting each other. And I worked on them in that chronological order. So it was like this piece was done, then that piece was done, and then that one was last. And I moved back and did some more processes because I learned a couple different beading techniques that are specific to these. But yeah, it was definitely like chronologically when I got to the end, it just kind of needed the red and the green together. Mm-hmm. They're also contrasting, and I love like a strong contrast. Mm-hmm. We're good?
Yeah.
Okay. So I also wanted to do a quick activity to explain how the weaving process works. This is hands-on, so you can step in or step out. It's all up to you. You are going to have to stand, and you will need to grab onto some ropes. So if that's something you're not able to do, there's something else to happen. So does anyone who wants to participate? Let's start there. Everybody, right? Okay. So I have some string, and we're gonna start by making a loom. I don't know how many people it was, but can we make 2 lines? I think, let's go, this is a slant, so maybe let's go 1 line here and 1 line here. Ideally equal, and I'll organize this further, but that's just the start. So how many? 5, 6. Chelsea, you want to come in?
I can.
Okay, just to even out the numbers. Okay.
Where do you want me?
You'll go over here. Yes, so we're gonna see how this works. I haven't done it with like, there's so much space. So we're gonna just start with giving you 1 piece. And you're gonna get 1 piece, ooh, that's cut, which isn't bad. And then you're also gonna get 1 piece of thread. And then for you, I'm gonna have you grab this one and you're gonna grab this piece, just to keep it together, because I don't know if I wanna cut all of this. Here you go.
Do you want us to stand closer?
I think this is good. We can see how it looks, yeah, because I don't know. I've only done this 1 time. We're just figuring this out as we go. Okay, so I'm actually kind of out of yarn, so everyone else will have to do something else. Okay. I have more yarn though. So basically what we just did is called warping. So what you all are is this, when you weave you need tension, and the process of warping is where you create the length of the fabric, and it's really important that all the threads are just taut. I don't know how to describe that. But when you start weaving, if you have an automated loom, which is like what I'm using, there's something called a heddle, which looks like the head of a needle. It looks like that, and it grabs the thread like this, and it'll pick up the thread so that you can pass the thread through, and it'll start to create your image for you. So this is an extremely simplified version. I think for that piece over there, I want to say there was maybe 3,000 threads. So this time, a bit 600. And they're all really, really small. And what essentially happens is, I'm trying to think, so 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. Do you remember your numbers? I'll do that again. I just have to count off quick. So what would happen to create something called a plain weave is all the 1s would lift up their thread. And if you have a 2, keep your thread down. And what would, see, I wasn't expecting this level of length, so we're not gonna be able to make fabric. Unless, actually, do you wanna go on the other side? If you can catch, yeah.
We'll see.
You can throw the other one.
Oh my goodness.
Y'all just gonna have to throw it through.
We're just all
Yeah.
I cannot do this at the art.
You can't? Oh, the
I'm
art is
sorry.
right there. No, you're so
I
real.
can't throw at the art.
Okay.
But maybe
You can walk it. I can
I'll
walk it through.
I'll walk
You
it
can
through.
hold it and I'll walk it.
But-
Okay.
And I'll hold it? Yeah.
Yes.
just reach through.
Okay.
Okay, beautiful. So now, Chelsea, you can step back.
Sorry.
Thank you for that. Chelsea was a shuttle.
Not the artwork.
Yes. So now, if you had your thread up, can you put your thread down? So I think 2s will go up now. And then this thread will come all the way through.
There we go.
And right now, again, you all are the machine. So me passing the thread, that's what I would do. And let's do it again. So 2's down, 1's up. Okay. And then again. Perfect. Okay. We can do a little bit more. Thank you all for knowing what to do. Again, this is how it works with the computer. There's like a little pedal that you press on the larger machine, and it just does everything for you. So you can get really complex and do like full images.
Manually passing the thread?
Yes, you do manually pass the thread.
Just by hand?
So there's a thing called a shuttle, and it looks like maybe a clog or a boat, and there's a base for you to throw the shuttle. So you're basically just throwing it into your other hand, and they're about this, not the shuttle, the machine's about this big, so you kind of have to like rock into it, and like there's a motion, but
one thread at a time?
One thread at a time. So that's not how these work. This one is all machine, so like there's no human being here. This is also, I'm the machine too. But then for other pieces, I would be the actual one weaving and like winding the threads. So we can like just drop this down maybe and look at our beautiful piece of fabric. Let me just, okay. That'll help me explain more in the future. I'll just scoop it up. You got it, Chelsea?
I got it.
Thank you. Another thing that is really important with weaving, and it's why I chose them as the medium I like, is that they follow binary code. And I love computers, and like I do a lot of computer-based art and digital art. And weavings, you either go above or under the thread. So we were following like basically a 1-0-1-0-1-0 pattern by going 2's up, 1's up, 2's up, 1's up. And another fact is that, well, it's like kind of disputed now, but before everyone would say that the beginning of modern technology starts with looms, because the jacquard loom, which is a loom that came from France, jacquard, French name, which was not the first loom ever. Weaving, nobody really knows how it started. Like I think the first pieces of woven fabric are in Egypt, but there's also woven fabric everywhere in the world at that point in time. But they created this loom called the jacquard loom, which had pedals, and it did the thing automatically where I had you all lifting up. So it would control that, but it was still completely human controlled. So it was like partially automated, but not completely. And then eventually at some point, a woman, her name was Ada Lovelace, she created a punch card system for the jacquard loom that allowed it to automatically run on its own without having to have a person operate it. And this was the first time that there was an interaction that could be like identified as software and hardware becoming a thing. So the first time that things were really automated, allegedly. And that's the story people tell themselves. So I feel like when I was doing digital artwork, the transition from a digital piece, which is all flat pixels, into something that like directly reads those pixels to create an image made a lot of sense to me. And I really enjoyed that process. This is one of the, I want to say, there's one other thing in the show that's older than this, but this is the oldest thing. I think it was the first time that I really realized I could kind of just do whatever I wanted to. Which is complex to say, just because obviously like we're all free people, we can do whatever. But I did go to art school briefly, and I think during my time getting educated there, I didn't know what to do with the things I knew before art school, because I didn't go to like a place that had like an intense arts education. So I just had a lot of information about the European canon being like fed to me through a straw. And it wasn't necessarily things I regret. Like I don't resent learning that, but it did make it hard to work with fabrics and do things that I already knew how to do, which are things like skills I've been cultivating since I was a child. So I just didn't really know how to place my skills within the European canon is what I'm trying to say. But as I I spent more time learning and researching, I realized like outside of those canons, like all the other canons of the world, there's a situation for all these skills, and they all come together in very specific ways in other people's craft forms. So for this one, I was doing some applique. I dyed all the pieces of fabric. I am very color specific, and I just started cutting it and putting it together. And it was like the process all flowed together very easily. Like, it didn't come to me in a way that was difficult. And it like set the tone for a lot of things I made after this. I think the things I made before this, I just kind of keep them to myself, apart from one thing, just because I think I was confused. And I don't necessarily think like I found my way or anything at any point in my life, but I think this was the point where I was like, okay, this is how I can make art. And then I grew from that point on. In this piece over here, I also took a class in college that was all about natural dyes and the history of the dye trade, which was really, really like a lot. We understated a lot, but dyes were in a lot of places the second most known cash crop during transatlantic slave trade. And also like in Japan, a fact we say about indigo, I think, is 1/5 of all the farmland in Japan was just for growing indigo, which is the plant that creates this blue color. So it was very major. Like, the cultivation of dye plants was a really big deal. And we were just learning about all this knowledge, and I think I was noticing that a lot of the knowledge was situated outside of African diaspora and descendants of enslaved people. So I made this as a commemorative cloth about them, just using like all my indigo pieces, and then also using like some laser cutting and putting a lot of other things together. And commemorative cloth is a tradition that's very common in West Africa. When someone passes away or does something really grand, they'll just print their face on a piece of fabric, like repeat on fabric, and then you wear that as like a way to honor them. Like, I remember the first time I looked it up, I saw Obama commemorative cloth, and I was like, I don't know why, like what this has to do with Africa. But there was a lot of like Obama cloths. If there's like a new president or if someone you care about passes away, they'll just like put a lot of cloth into production. This piece here, I think I was like just exploring techniques. I learned how to do something called tambour embroidery, which is a technique that I think originates somewhere in India. I know it originates in India, but it was appropriated by French people. It was called Ari in India, and then they switched the name. That does not mean that. But basically, instead of threading a needle and attaching each bead one by one, you would add beads onto the needle, and the needle is a crochet hook. I brought a crochet hook to explain it. I was gonna do a sample, but I don't trust myself right now, because it will fall and I'll feel embarrassed. You know, I can't find it now, but I'll just pull it up later. I didn't want to have the Mary Poppins back, but it just happened. Okay. But we'll go over that. It's a process very similar to crochet. If you know how to crochet, you're just doing that, but through fabric instead of onto itself. So you just create a knot system, and it's a lot more like drawing than using an individual needle is, because you can bead with multiple beads at once. It's not just one. This over here, again, stop me if you have questions, but this was the first time I got to make a piece on the loom that I was talking about. So not that one. That one, I basically just bought them. But this one is a big machine called the TC2. I forget what state it comes from, but it's somewhere in Europe, like Northern Europe, I think. And it does the process of picking up the threads again, and then you just go through the process of throwing the shuttle through with your threads on it. So I had like a lot more freedom with the thread I was using. Like, I spun tinsel onto this one so it has like a reflective effect, and then, I don't know, I was just able to have fun. The imagery, I don't know what was going on. I like drawing a lot, and I have like a sketchbook practice that's very important to me. So it was just one of my sketches because the class was like very fast paced. And the only time you get to use one of these machines really is inside of a classroom or during a residency, because there's not a lot of them and they're very, very, very expensive, like in the upper tens of thousands. So it's not something you can even rent for your house. This is another piece I made from that process. This was my test piece. Every time I do anything, I always do 2 tests. The first one, I just do like literally whatever, which I brought. Oh, I actually have 2 things to share. Okay, so this is my first test. You can all touch it because it's not important. But it was the first time that I got this fabric and I really had no clue what to do with it. So I just went ahead and tried a lot of different materials, like whatever paints I had on hand, whatever pigments I had, markers, I tried sewing on it, beading into it, just whatever to see like how the material would react to my processing of it. And that was the one where I was like, I don't really care, I gotta mess it up. I think I got like a critique when I was younger that like I do try to be perfect too often. And I think from that, I like released the perfectionism and just like let something happen, and then I forgot what actually works. And in this piece, I just tried to pull it together. And I think actually just on perfectionism, I would never say I like strive to be imperfect, because I don't think that makes sense. But I do like strive to be the best version of myself at every moment. So this was the best I had to offer at that moment, which I'm not mad at it. But this I was like trying to be more refined and also like use more embroidery techniques and just care about it a little bit more. I also do have a sample of the fabric from the TC2 that people can touch as well. This one, it was just like something I made in class. I don't care about it that much. But it was something called a double cloth, which if you weave, it basically means that this is woven, you weave 2 pieces of fabric at once. And I don't know exactly how to explain that because it's very complicated. But it would be like if we all had 1 layer of thread, which is what we had just now, and then everyone's second hand was holding another piece of thread. And simultaneously you would interchange them in a way that you were only weaving 1 set at once. And so when I was weaving it on the loom, it looked like this, but then when we cut it off, it was twice the size. Here you go. Just so you can get a tactile feel. I think that's important. That's good for that. This was another study I did.
I love that.
Oh, thank you. I have nothing to say about it, but thank you though. It was just for fun. Again, it was a sketch. Like I just had a lot of sketches and I was just cutting fabric and seeing how much intention I need to put in things to like let them feel done. But that's one thing. And then these are some sketches. Again, I really do like drawing. That's normally how I start every drawing process, every like art process. I had one teacher that gave an assignment to draw something 40 to draw something 40 times. So I just like, I don't know, I think I really clung to that assignment. It was just like a 12 by 12 image, so we had to draw the same thing on these 12 by 12 images, pieces of paper. And after that, I realized like you actually need to draw something 40 times to get the first idea out, or like to actually understand why you're interested in what you're interested in. Like that happened with those pieces. There was maybe it was 32 or something. It might have not been exactly 40, but I was just trying to understand like why am I interested in trees right now? And it made sense by the end. But I think that's it for this fall. Are there any questions? Yes.
I've never heard of tinsel as material. I mean, I have for Christmas, but
Yeah.
the only piece you use tinsel in?
I think I used it one other time. It's not something that's like easy to find.
Right.
And it is the same thing that they use on Christmas stuff. It's like really thin spun wire. So it is metal.
And less stretchy than many of the other materials you're using. I was curious about
Yeah.
the tensile. Does that present a challenge or not so much?
While you're weaving, yes.
Okay.
Like it will snap because, like you said, the actual thread has a little bit of give to it, not a lot, but like enough that over time you have to spin them together And at some point, I don't know if like the thread catches up with the tinsel or what it is, but they separate and then it'll break. But then you just cut the thread and start again. It's not fun, but it's also not like so painful that I wouldn't do it again. It's also really, for clothing, I feel like if you've worn anything that's itchy and glittery, it was probably tinsel. That's like how I always think of it, especially if it was tacky, but that's it.
I have another question. if that's
Okay.
all right. I noticed you mounted this and then the digital printed ones. Is that
Yeah.
something you think about ahead of time, or?
That actually came because of the process.
Okay.
I called a friend who's a painter, and she was like, "Are you gonna stretch them?" And I said, maybe I should. It wasn't in my head, because normally I think when I'm working on like other things, as you see, they just hang on the wall and it makes sense to me. But stretching those pieces is actually part of the beading process. And afterwards I was like, oh, this actually looks a little bit more presentable.
Yeah, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that is it. I ended up just leaving them.
Because I was curious, too, those are later works, and
Yeah.
earlier works are not necessarily stretched, right?
Yeah, and that was a thing of space, I think, because when they're not stressed, I could fit everything in the entire show in this bag and go away. But now that I like have enough space, it's easier to stretch things and just leave them that way and not like try to use the same frame on 12 things. But that is always the start of most fiber processes in general. If anyone's familiar with any technique, you would know tension is just like the #1 important thing. So that's just how I created tension. But if you have like an embroidery hoop, that's another way to create tension. If you're knitting, when you grab the thread and like, well, not knitting, crocheting, they have like tools to make sure that the thread always is taut in some way and maintains the same tension, because if you mess it up at some point, it's just like everything is not good. But it makes that process a lot easier, and I'll find the hook and show it.
Do you ever revisit the work before the first one?
Sometimes, I mean, like before that I was in high school, so it's like things that I don't think I enjoy looking at the most.
Right.
There is one piece in there that is from before that, but it's like more so personal. And me and Chelsea found out a way to hang it that was like, this feels protected and blocked, shielded.
Is deviant, or the difference between what was created versus what's on the wall, would you consider it to be like night and day?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say so. Because again, when I got thrown into that environment, I really had no clue what I was doing. Like on my first week, they gave us an assignment, like draw something. It was like very vague, like draw a tree or draw a landscape. And I actually broke down because like I've never gotten an assignment like that before. So I was just like floundering for the first couple months, and I didn't know how to like handle a critique, which is a thing that happens where people just tell you that you're not good at things, or that you're really good at things, or that you should do more of something or do less. It's just like it's a lot of information. So I think by that point I'd processed and like figured out how to tune people out. But before that, I think I was trying to appease people in a way that didn't really make sense for me.
Right. This is just you.
Kind of. I mean, I still do appease people. I don't like... I like beautiful things. Like, I like things to be visually pretty. And that's like a social understanding. Like, that doesn't work everywhere. Yeah, I was reading a book just about how, like, we live in a society that's like a very common principle is cleanliness is closest to God, or something of that statement, but that sentiment does not exist everywhere. So me chasing after something that looks like clean and beautiful is like very much a byproduct of me being here. And some of the objects that I was looking at, they don't have that history, so they just approach materials completely differently. And I forgot what I was talking about, but that's okay. Okay, so I think it makes sense to start with the mural, since it's the largest thing here. It's also like one of the largest things I've done in a while. I have like worked on murals and like done larger scale projects, but I've never really seen one all the way through from beginning to end. And it's kind of rare to get to do that, to like design it and then paint it, unless you're getting like a very specific commission. But this piece, I think it reflects more of my illustration work and my graphic design work, which is what I do for like my day labor. Well, not day labor, my 24-hour, 27, whatever 24/7 labor. Yeah, that one. That's my bread and butter. Because a lot of the times when I do work, it is just digital, and then I send it off somewhere, and that's the whole project. So this was just a projection that we worked on it really quickly. Like, it was basically 3.5 days, I want to say, which was really fast. But I wanted to like try to pull images from other parts of the exhibition into this one, just create like an all-encompassing image of a nighttime fantasy garden. And there's little creatures too. It's also very inspired by the image that I used to create 2 of the weavings in there, which we'll get to soon. Yeah, is there any questions?
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Not a question.
Yes.
Did you choose the stars purposefully?
Yeah. It was the last thing to go on, like the very, very last thing, because everyone else, there was like a lot of volunteers, which was really helpful, because this would not have been possible without volunteers at all. But I was just here with my friend on the last day, and we were watching America's Next Top Model. We just had it on the ground, and I originally planned to put the stars in, but I was like, I don't know if it's too much. And then I just found the nail head and just started dotting it around, and it really tied things together. I just like the look of stars too, because I think in another piece I would have like had sequins there or beads there or something that like had a reflective quality. So I just wanted to bring the light back in. Yeah.
I appreciate the eyes of the ravens, I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Where it's matching the stars as well. I feel like there's something there. I don't know what it is yet.
Yeah.
But there's something there.
There's a drawing, it didn't make it into the show, but it's literally just like a tree of ravens that have their eyes as the stars of the sky, because that was something I saw once, or felt like I saw. I used to live in Baltimore for a little bit, and they do have like a lot of ravens there. I don't know if they have more, or if it's just because like the Edgar Allan Poe lore that exists, but sometimes you'll just be driving, and there'll just be a tree full of birds, and they'll all start to fly at the same time, and it's really beautiful. But I think about those moments a lot. I used to be outside at nighttime a lot too, which I don't do anymore. I would just be on my bike and I would see things that I really liked. I think we can move on to the next piece. Or I did have another activity. Does anyone have a preference? Huh? Activity? Okay. So the next activity I have is just a visioning process. And it's a little bit silly. I just wanted to try it with people and see what happens, just to like bring everyone else on what feels like the artistic process, even if that's not what you do, or like you don't identify yourself as an artist, but we're just going to use our minds to create something. So it's a little game. It's not that, you don't have to do too much. I'm basically going to give everyone an object, and I forget how many, let me count again. Is that an even number? 6, 9, 2, 11. Okay, oh, and you're not included. Are you gonna be included? Okay, so then we're at 10. So I'm gonna give everyone an object, and you're gonna close your eyes, you're gonna hold it behind your back, and I want you to feel it, and try to imagine what it is, and try to find out who has the same object as you in the room. And again, this is supposed to be a process of trying to take something we can feel but cannot see into something that we can see, which is just the imaginative process that begins all artwork. And I also wanted to do it here. My brain's connecting now. The reason I wanted to do it here is because that's like very important to all my illustration work. It's just trying to figure out how you can take something from your imagination or something that feels intangible and then communicate that to other people around you. So I'm trying to think. Can everyone close their eyes and hold one hand out? I don't want anybody to see the objects either, so I had to close them now. These are just like, does anyone have any plant allergies? Okay, there's a little bit of plant matter in here. And close your hand, put it behind your back. No peeking. I'll give you this one. Again, the only rule of the game really is that you cannot look at what you have. and you should avoid looking at what other people have. But, so again, this process is just focusing on trying to feel something and like have a knowledge of something in one sense and try to verbalize it and bring it into this realm, this space. So you can all just start talking to each other. I think I'll give it like a couple minutes. I don't know. Should we all reveal at once or go pair by pair and have them say, let's go pair by pair. I want to hear the color that you thought it was. Maybe if you thought it was something else, but we can start here.
Sure. Okay. I described it as like a piece of salmon, but a salmon skin, but one of the sides of the skin was kind of fuzzy.
Okay.
And the other side is kind of like slick.
Yeah.
And color.
Whoa.
We were off on the color though.
Yeah.
I was like white, cream.
Like magenta, purple.
This is beautiful.
I mean, you would never know.
Hold it up.
Yeah.
What is it?
Oh, it's
Yeah.
It's much more beautiful than I thought it was.
They're just random things. They have no meaning, just so you know. Like, okay. And I also just think it's important that we do things that like open us up mentally and like get to exercise our imaginations, because it's not a thing that we get to use often, and imagination also will disappear if you don't use it. It's a muscle. I was listening to a podcast recently about how some people have something called aphantasia, so they don't see things, like they don't have an image in their head. Of course, they still have an imagination and a mind. Yes, it's really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The science podcast.
I might have been that one. I don't remember, but I don't know. I also was like, let's use language and not focus on drawing, just because I think drawing is like intimidating. And in my experience as a teacher, when you ask somebody to draw, they usually shut down, which is kind of sad to see. Like, you don't want to see someone not believe in themselves in that way to do something as simple as like writing, actually, because drawing is just like elongated writing, or writing is small drawing. But I don't know, exercise and imagination. Thank you all for participating. I'll do it again one day. This is also the first time, I think, it's actually the second time I've had an art talk in person. All the other ones have been online because of the pandemonium. Sorry. But this, am I allowed to touch it?
Yeah.
Okay. So this piece,
It's yours.
it is mine. I have to double check. Like, once it's on the wall, I don't know. But you before were asking a question about coloration of things. This is a piece where I actually started working on it on the other side because I like had a vision that I was gonna have like this black and white outline, and then I was gonna paint everything in. So if you do look on the other side, there is like a whole nother version of it on the back.
Oh, wow.
Which I like hated a lot. I really didn't like it. Hold up, I'm stuck. And I don't know why I didn't. It was like a very fast timeline, and I don't think I react well to quickness. Like, I do need time to like let things mellow, and I just didn't like it, so I tried to bleach it, and I didn't know what the fabric was made out of, or the thread was. I just guessed, because we hadn't used anything synthetic, that it would take some type of bleach, and it ended up taking the bleach in like a pattern based on which type of black thread I used, because I was using 2 different types of black threads. You can see the lines going through from the weaving process. This was like one of the larger weavings I did as well. And afterwards is when I started doing all the beading, and I did that on my own timeline because I would never bead on somebody else's timeline. It's just very labor intensive, and again, it's special to me. It's not something that I would ever think about like monetizing necessarily, because it just takes forever. Like, when you see this, you have to pick up each bead one by one. So, and I enjoy the process, so I would never complain. But it's also, again, something that's like very hard to monetize, and it's a big problem right now in fast fashion because there's not really machines that bead exactly. It's almost always done by hand. So anytime you see like a beaded bag or like some of those things from like the 80s and 70s, like those beaded blouses, it was all somebody's handwork. In general, everything is handwork. Machines don't do as much as we think that they do, but that is separate. And in terms of the imagery, I was really inspired by the Apocalypse tapestries in Angers, France. And I got to see it, which was like really mind-blowing because they're gigantic, like really, 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 really big. I can't describe outside of that language, but like bigger, a lot bigger than the entire Magic Gardens. But it's just this really long string of tapestries, and it's the largest one in the world, where they were depicting, what's the end of the Bible called? Where the world ends?
Revelations?
Revelations, yes. And they were depicting all these different scenes from Revelations. And that was, I think, what honestly probably got me started thinking about the apocalypse as like a not ugly thing necessarily, or like as a thing that could be really potent visual information. And I took, in Sierra Leone, there's a deity called Mami Wata, and she is complex. It's like a conglomerate of a lot of other water deities, and everyone knows about her. She has like a very specific religious following, which I would never claim, I'm not a part of that, but they have like very specific stories that they tell about this deity. She also, as a deity, came around during colonization, or at least the name for her did, because Mami Wata is English for mother water, like pidgin English. So this deity was like a reaction to the colonization of their traditional practices and how they brought her into the contemporary. So a lot of the stories that, like, if I ever say I was like thinking about stories or imagining something or like a childhood story, a lot of them do have to do with Mami Wata. And then some of them were just like abstract stories about like animals. There was one story my dad always told about a goat and a lion, which I always laughed at because he only saw a lion in a zoo for the first time. Like there's not lions just walking around West Africa. But there was just always a story, like the lion was always like the vicious creature and the goat was always like a foolish creature, and it was about this goat who would just, the lion took a bite out of the goat at some point, and it was a whole like forgive but don't forget thing where the goat kept on going back to lion and like got pieces of it cut out again and again, and then it was dead. That doesn't have anything to do with this. I don't know if it has anything to do with anything. But every time I think about that, I'm like, okay, there was a lot of things that were told to me when I was younger that I didn't understand in the moment, but now when I think about them, they make so much more sense because I have context, and I know that the lion wasn't literally a lion, and that the goat wasn't actually a goat, but like we're the goat and also the lion, and those things exist. But this was just me eventually like coming to understand what things mean. And are there any questions?
What is the significance? Is it a crocodile or alligator?
It's a crocodile.
Okay.
Or an alligator. I forget which one is specific to which area. What is one of them?
But it's interesting where the figures are positioned on top, kind of walking alongside. Like in harmony, there's no like aggression or fear.
Because there is, I don't know how real this is, but there are stories of tame crocodiles or alligators that I don't know if it's like actually real or if it's, well, mythology is real, but like if it's in that realm or if it's like something people have done. But people talk about like sitting on them and like playing around with them because when they're tired, they are kind of docile, like after they've eaten. Not before, but like it's not it's not hard to imagine someone being able to like sit on a crocodile or like have that as their equivalent of like a horse or something that they ride on. This piece, it just came from a sketch. It was also just me having fun mostly. I don't have too much to say about it. I was, at this point, I think I realized, because when I was at school, I was in a fiber program, so they did teach us like very rigorous ways of handling fabric that are not necessarily feasible, like if you're working out of your apartment or if you move. I move a lot because I like moving, but it's hard to like have a stable studio practice. So over time, I've just been like letting go of certain restraints, and I just started to paint on this with like India ink and whatever, and then attached it to the fabric. So it was just the learning process. And this was the thing that I made that like started the process for finishing the pieces for this show. It was before I had ordered a lot of the weavings, just because I didn't want to like wait and then have them come and be disappointed maybe. So I just started to make other things, and I have a lot of materials like this fabric, like this pinkish fabric, I dyed for that piece that was over there, and I just kept it. I hold on to everything too, just because I think like trash can be subjective. And I don't really believe in throwing away fabric or materials that other people could use, especially just as an individual. I definitely think like larger corporations definitely should not be doing that, but as an individual, I just don't like creating that much trash from art practice. Even though art is important, I don't think it's worth making trash over. And I finished it off with a border that was similar to a lot of other pieces that was from the scraps of the process of making this, and then also the scraps from other projects. So it was like a lot of scrap pieces put together, and I added on the beading, and yeah, are there any questions? I saved a couple images just because there are things I referenced that are like very specific visually, and I should have been showing them while we were going, but. So for the apocalypse tapestries, this is one of them. I'll just come close. Actually, I'm not supposed to move and talk. Y'all can pass it around, just be careful. I don't have a screen protector. That's one of them that was like just really inspiring. Again, I remember seeing them, and a lot of the art that we were shown from Europe when we were in school, and just in general, like when you're at museums, the only esoteric value is like solely through Christianity, and you don't really see the things that people were practicing in Europe before Christianity, because there was a lot of pre-Christian practices that like got demonized. And there's a book about it called Caliban and the Witch, which I really liked, and it was about basically how what happened to the world happened inside of Europe first. Like the whole entire colonial process was at first practiced in Europe, and then it got expanded. And I thought it was really interesting, and it was specifically through like the witch hunts, or like what we call the witch hunts, which were a lot more complex than that. But I remember seeing these tapestries, and I was like, there's something else going on here. And that brought me a lot of joy, thank you. When I was talking about, I'm just gonna hold this one up, but this is what an Asafo flag looks like. The process is very similar to this piece over here, where they would cut out pieces of fabric and then stitch them onto a base that was probably woven. And they've always been really inspiring to me. They're not something I saw growing up, but my mom was Pentecostal, and she's alive. She is Pentecostal actively. And sometimes when we were at church, they would have these flags that they had sewn, and they would use the same process of applique to create the imagery. And I always thought that was really interesting and very beautiful, and it's a very similar process. I've always like a just general research interest is how skills have been transmuted throughout the African diaspora, because I just think it's fascinating that like people worlds away could be doing the same thing, and like there could be so much disruption to that activity, but generations later, hundreds of years later, it's still happening in a very similar fashion. And I have one photo of the Haitian voodoo flags. They're very like blurry. The whole background is all sequins. It's like a really firmly sequined base. And sometimes the image in the front is just a piece of paper that was painted on top of, and then they just sew it down. And they're like really heavy. They're basically just like solid glass. I also thought those were beautiful. Those were inspirations. And yeah, I think we can go to the inside room. The enclave. Okay. So all the pieces in here are like from different periods, of course. This is the piece that I was like, this is the first thing I made that was in the show. Again, I'm happy I showed the Haitian voodoo flag before, because that was like a very strong inspiration, because there's a lot of artists who like, they're being made today, they're not historical objects. But there's just something really beautiful about them that like I can't express or put into words. So I just wanted to see what type of process it took to make one, and also how much time it takes, because it's an extensive process. And for this piece over here, there's a poem that goes with it, but I forget, it's not my poem, it's somebody else's, and I forget the name. But it's just basically about how the earth is a black woman that's covered in mud. And I remember reading the poem and feeling very like personally attached to that description. Not for me specifically, but like seeing how things that are not human are also treated as racialized objects, which I don't know if I'll get into it later. But seeing how like the same systems that make us marginalized people are the same systems that lead to marginalization of the earth and devaluing of the planet. And I was just trying to express that here. And a lot of other places I tried to get on that too, but it's a very large idea that doesn't fit on a lot of visual art pieces. So it's a spoken piece, which I just spoke out loud. And then behind me, it was a lot of things. So I started with this central piece. I think in general, as I've done art, I found that research is more important to me. Like academic research and learning is really, really important, and sometimes just like a straightforward visual arts practice just wasn't enough. So when I made this, I was doing something completely unrelated, and I was in a library, and I saw a roach in the library, and I'm like really afraid of creatures, like very, very deeply afraid of them. And when I saw it, like I was jittery for like hours afterwards, maybe a day or something. In Minnesota, we don't have roaches, it's too cold. Or maybe we didn't have roaches, like my family did not have roaches. So when I got to the East Coast and they're literally everywhere, like on the streets at night, like crawling in and out of trash cans, I realized I hadn't really paid them any attention. And if anything, I'd overlooked them and just thought of them as dirty and minuscule. So after I like just really sat with the feeling, I was like, why do they feel so... I felt so strongly towards them that I didn't know where to place it. So I started to do research into roaches, and I found that roaches were actually brought to the United States, or North America, Turtle Island, through the transatlantic slave trade. They were not native to here, and they were specifically like hitchhikers on boats that went back and forth. So after finding that, I was like, how did we exist with the roaches before that happened? Because they've always been in our space, like ancestrally, we've always been connected to them. And I don't know if people liked them or if they were like considered dirty back then, but I think when I saw them, like a very particular feeling that came up was like death. Like something about them made me feel like I was going to die or had already died. So I just wanted to put something together that like tried to encapsulate all those feelings, and also was like enjoyable to make. I think one thing that I've taken from like funerals in at least my family is that they're not the saddest moment in general. Like there's other things to look forward to after life. So like at funerals, people wear white. There's like food after, there's a party, sometimes it's multiple days. Like it's not necessarily something to be afraid of. So I just wanted to figure out how to transmute that emotion into an art piece, which is supposed to be a funeral, essentially. Then on this wall, I have another example of a weaving I did that was a lot more complicated. I'll get out of here soon. This was a lot more complicated, and it's all woven, there's no dye work in it. It was just me passing threads through. And I don't know if you can't really see it on the back, but this is closer to how a tapestry would be woven, or if you've heard of, sometimes people just call it jacquard fabric. There's another brocade fabric as well. If you've heard any of those words, it's a very similar process like upholstery making, where you have a lot of threads and the color you want gets pushed up to the top through the organization of the warp threads. The machine makes it very easy. I actually have a video of me weaving it too that I can show. I think that's it. There's this piece on this wall, which we can all see later. I don't have too much to say about it. I think the inspiration from it definitely came when I was like looking at family photos, especially photos where there was like multiple generations in one photo. And I titled it For the Bush Girls because a bush girl is just somebody, it's kind of derogatory, but sometimes it's not derogatory, like can also be affirmative. It just means you live like in the country. I don't know what the English equivalent of it is, or not English, the American English equivalent, but it just means like you're from out there. Like you live in the area that's like very close to land, and like you probably haven't got to the point where you're conceptualizing yourself as a person who's separate from the land. So you act differently, and I don't know, there's just always something beautiful about the people that I think will get called bush girls, and I just want to honor that. and exemplify it because I think, I don't know, that's it for there. Are there any questions for this room? Yes?
I thought there was a projection on the wall earlier. I was going to ask about if that was meant to look like water. Or... I guess I was just curious, knowing that it's a burial scene now, I was just curious about the water in the background.
Yeah, I think I was thinking about, I was thinking about when you die, I think there's like an image of people going upwards, because we situate heaven as upwards, but upwards is like, what's the word? It's a subjective location. It could be left, it could be right, it could be down. So I was just like, what if it's sideways? And like, what happens if you don't necessarily go somewhere else? What if it's like also still here? I don't know. I think the water just added like a feeling of, not disorientation, but like situation, like it gave it a definite location, like it's happening over water, or there's like a window behind that goes to the water. I wanted to think about a window as well. The option for the projector, it wasn't last minute, but when it was offered, I like immediately thought like this is what it needs to be. I've never done something with a projector before. I want to do more though. It was really exciting. Yeah. Are we good?
Have you worked much with like sculpture before, or is, I'm really drawn to like the way the sculpture translates so well the figures in your two-dimensional work.
Yeah, I want to work with sculpture more. I think as of now, it's been like a space thing of like, where do I put these things? Like even right now, like I already got a storage unit. I can't get another storage unit. So that's one thing that's like always in my mind. I do like working in soft sculpture though, because it is flat. Like you start off flat and you can just inflate anything. You can also deflate it, which is something I was thinking about doing. I have worked, I don't know actually about sculpture. I used to work a lot with adornments and clothing, and I still do. I just didn't really think it made sense in this space, so I didn't bring that here. But like studying adornments and like how people alter their bodies was like really interesting to me for a while too. So I think this is more so connected to like how it would work on clothes. Because I think also the process like flat patterning, like drawing something on a piece of fabric on the ground and then stuffing it up is like very similar to how you create clothing. Honestly, I just draw clothes because like it always trips me out a little bit, but like pants are just what our skin looks like. Like if it wasn't on our bodies, like if it was flat, it would look like a pair of pants because that's how they're made to fit us, and it's the same thing with like a bodysuit. So I would just take that information and be like, okay, these are what legs look like when they're flat, and then I would just draw them out. But that's it.
You started to tell a story about your experience with roaches, but I was wondering, is that incorporated in this piece in some way?
Yes, sorry. So you have to get close, but there's little jeweled roaches on here. Oh, y'all couldn't see that, and I was just I must have sounded something way specific. But if you get really close, you can see there's like jeweled roaches that are incorporated. There's also black-eyed peas on the face because that's a funeral food. I make it sometimes, but I try to do it different. So, but yeah, I guess you can all get close afterwards.
So what started you on your journey to do these, just in general, at what age, and how did you begin your journey in this area?
So it definitely started, like I don't remember the beginning exactly. I want to say it started with like sewing clothes for Beanie Babies. Beanie Babies. You know, okay. Okay. Yeah, I had 3 of them, and it was 3 rabbits. It was pink, purple, and green. And I would just make them outfits because my grandma was just like, it's not hard. This is how you do it. And like that was a quality time thing that we used to do. And then I think before that, I still have this stuffed animal. His name is Baloo. He's a polar bear. And his parts would just fall off. Like I got him before I was born. So he's really, really old. And like there was a time period where like I would not let go of Baloo. like at all. Like I could not fall asleep, and it lasted a long time that I just like could not let that creature go. So every time like his head popped off or his arm popped off in the wash, my grandma would just like teach me how to sew him back together. So it was just like basic. I think that was how I learned how to hold a needle. I don't think I really did anything with it until later when like I liked sewing my Halloween costumes. That was a thing that was fun. I sewed my prom outfit when I graduated, but again, it was nothing like too serious. I think it was only when I got to school that I was like, okay, I can like really do something with these skills. But it started when I was young. We didn't really learn about quilting, and I think my grandma, when she sewed, she didn't sew like I didn't realize I had these glasses on this whole time. Oops, I don't have to read anything. She didn't sew like in a traditional European way. Like I remember she used to like, if she didn't have an iron, she would just use her fingers to like press fabric. Like just the heat from her fingers would be used to like create creases. She didn't really like use a pattern. She would just measure people and just hold the measurements in her head and then immediately make a garment from it. It was like a lot of squares and like round shapes and like puffy shoulders, just really interesting shapes. But she would just do it really fast, and like anytime there was a wedding or something, she would make everyone's outfit that was like in the bridal party or something. And I think just watching her do that, it made it feel very tangible. But it's also the type of thing that I was like, if you ask her, she probably won't remember. Like these weren't like sit down and teach moments. Like they weren't constructed. It was just like I was there watching, or she was watching me, and I just learned.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Do you have a lot of ideas in your inventory of pieces that you want to make, or is it, you know, I'm inspired, I create, I get it out? What's the...
Yeah, I do plan. I plan a lot. Because I'm always drawing and I don't really know when things are going to make sense. And I try not to get rid of things. I've had a lot of people say just like never throw anything away, which isn't always feasible because some things are not good, like objectively not good. But I do like to just hold on to everything and then see what it becomes something. Like these are all just things I drew. I have my iPad, I can show the image. But I just drew these when I was on the plane. I really love drawing on the plane. Like it's my favorite place to do things, not at the airport. I don't like the airport. But these are what the images started as. So like this is that one. Wow. So it's just from this little pencil. And then I sent something like very similar to this to the people who wove it. And then this is that one over there.
So do you draw this on your iPad?
Yeah.
Can you get the colors on the iPad also?
Yeah, I do. I like test them out and see. Just because it's like, I feel like there's a lot of people who would do it not with digital art, but like they would take a picture of the art piece and like adjust it digitally to see what it'd look like. And I was like, oh, I could just plan the whole thing digitally.
Is there a particular kind of software or app that you're using?
I just use Procreate. It's like a very, very, very rudimentary drawing. You know Procreate. It's very basic. It's my favorite app because there's no monthly fee. You pay $10 one time and you get updates for the rest of your life. And I like that because it feels a lot more like equitable and accessible. And I also used to teach people with Procreate just because it's something that everybody could get. Because $10 it's not like no money, but it's not a lot of money. And something like Adobe costs like $500 a year as an adult. And yeah. And you're forced to pay that $500. Like if I did not pay that $500 a year, I don't have a job. Like, but that's a whole separate thing. Adobe has a monopoly over all design in the entire world, and they force everyone to pay their $500 membership fee. But that's separate.
Do you know what's next? What are you going to create next?
I don't know. I'm definitely excited to like go back to my more like design practice, like work for hire type of projects, because I miss the structure a little bit. With this work, it's never done. Like there's always something to do, and there's nobody telling you something is done. Like you just kind of have to emotionally know that you're there. So I didn't overwork myself, but I definitely did not know when to stop. And with my work for hire, I feel like I do my own thing and then they say you're done. Or there's a timeline and then you're done. And it feels very like contained. That does look very different, not that different. Like it looks like the same person did it, but it looks different from this work, so I didn't want to show that because it would be prints. Yeah. Yes.
So this is like the second exhibition I've seen here, and there's always like a sensibility in the work that seems similar to like the environment and the building and Isaiah Ziegler's work. And I don't know, I was just wondering how you think like your work interacts with that, or if you were like familiar with Magic Gardens, or what it's kind of like showing. Sure.
Well, I definitely knew about the space because I lived in Philadelphia for a while, and I feel like if you're just on South Street, like you see it. It's pretty iconic. So I'd only been here once before, and I saw another artist. And then when me and Chelsea started talking about the show, Zainab was showing, right? Yes, so I saw that show. And it also made a lot of sense with the space. I think, I don't know, it just works. Like when I see the things on the wall, I'm like, okay, this is very similar. That's a good question though. I don't really think I like consciously tried to draw the connection apart from visually. Because visually, like a lot of the shapes are similar. I think especially to the mural, there's like a lot of pieces I've been picking out that look like they could have influenced or came from that mural. And they didn't, but it is like a very similar artistic sensibility. I also, yeah, I'll keep it there. I think the space makes a lot of sense. I love that it's shiny and that there's like reflections, because I also do try to have reflections with like beads and sequins, and then having the mirrors everywhere is like the macro version of that. And it feels like it's handled in like a very similar way.
Have you used mirrors in your work before? Because there's some like Indian textiles that would weave that in.
Yeah, I've done that technique before, like in a sample, but I haven't done it on a large scale. I don't know, because it's very interesting to me. Like there's a lot of people that do it too. Like, of course, I think the first time I saw it was like an Indian textile, but when I did more research, it was like connected to evil eye. So like everywhere that has an evil eye concept has some form of mirror sewn into a garment, which I was just, I don't know, I'm very fascinated by it. And I think it's something, I'll probably explore it when I get there. I worked with somebody else though who wanted mirrors in their work, because a part of what I do sometimes is like help other people fabricate their projects, just because I have a lot of subject specific knowledge. So someone wanted mirrors sewn in, and that's how I learned how to do it. It's really cool though.
Do you ever go through phases of not feeling like creating?
Yeah, for sure.
What typically ends up bringing you out and inspiring you? Or was it just time too?
That's a good question. I don't actually know. Now that you're saying this, sometimes it's a deadline. Like I am a deadline person.
Yeah.
I like deadlines that help me live well, and I'll push them. Like I don't believe it. I love pushing the deadline, but like it does help me structure my life to have a calendar. Like, okay, this is gonna start on this day and end on this day, and it might get pushed over, but if I need to communicate that, I can. So that's really important. I am always drawing and writing and journaling. I don't really stop doing that. I can't really think of a time when I haven't done those things. So normally that's kind of like the jump off point. Like, oh, this drawing feels really important. I'm gonna do something else with it, and then I do something. But a lot of my drawings, like I have so many sketchbooks just filled with things that are probably never gonna see the light of day, and I'm not mad at it. I think it's like important for balance, but yeah, there definitely are periods where like I'm not doing anything other than drawing. And when I say drawing, I mean just like a pencil, like a mechanical pencil, not like anything involved. Yes, like it's a scribble. It's definitely a scribble. Yeah. I did have two other samples I wanted to show, just because I brought them. Both of them were specifically, I should have shown them over there, but that piece that was on the wall, the really big one, there's beads all over my floor, just so you know. It's much worse than you think. But these are two things that were also like experimental pieces. The technique where like you stuff into something is called trapunto. I think that's an Italian word, maybe. But it's just like where you would create a pouch on fabric and then stuff it with something. And I tried beading onto it. It's interesting. I also tried cut work on this, which has a lot of cultural footholds again, but it's basically where instead of adding fabric on top to create the image, you create layers of fabric and then cut it away, and then the image is behind it. Mola, which I think is like a Peruvian, well, I think it's just Central American, actually, I don't know. Mola, it exists in a lot of places, but it's an art form where they practice cut work and like cutting into an image. So both of these were just experiments in that. Again, they're not too precious, so like if a bead falls off, I'm not upset at you.
You should be on here in Harvard.
No. There's like more things in here that I have not shown.
So I have.
I'm like, it's just gonna get deeper. Another technique I've really loved is called peyote stitch. It's a beading technique. Also don't necessarily know exactly where it comes from. I don't think the name is like an actual reference to an American indigenous group. I think it's, I'm not actually sure. The history of arts and crafts is very silly. Like people just kind of name things whatever they want to. But these are both peyote stitch. It's a skill where you're literally, instead of having a process where you're weaving and creating tension by holding threads, you create tension by weaving into beads. So it's like off the loom weaving. I don't know how to describe that other than this, but you just put the beads on. It's similar to crochet in terms of like the counting method, and it feels really good. This is a little person I made. Yeah.
So then that process, it naturally creates this ripple almost?
That's
Does
from,
that?
so, no, it's okay. I forget what the word is for the math equation. There's a word for it. It's not exponential growth. Well, it is an exponential growth. Basically, when you're creating a circle, you have to maintain an equation in between each row of that circle so that it stays flat. But if you were to double the amount of stitches in each row progressively, it starts to create a ruffle. There's a parabolic, yes, because there's a thing called parabolic crochet. Like a mathematician who also crocheted was like, oh, if you just do the increase, you can like model this complex equation. So it's just something I do when I'm bored. It takes a really long time though, because since each row is doubling, the amount on the outside row sometimes is more than all the work you've done on the inside. It's very interesting, but it's a math equation. That's how I gotta say it.
Have you ever heard of, my sister does a basketry,
Yeah.
and it's a coiling method. It's all done by hand, and it feels really, because the tightness of she uses, a woven thread, and then like a plastic covered thread to do the sewing.
Oh,
It's
interesting.
all hand done, and she weaves them. And you've seen
I saw that.
yeah, I call them deformed female figures.
Okay. Okay.
This is
Yes.
but they deform figures.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, not too much.
Some people like to think of them as vases because you can put, because they're hollow. And no, it's hard.
Yes.
Not like that.
Yeah.
So I didn't know if you were, because we were talking about sculpture, and these are sculptures.
Yeah.
But they're woven and very, you just keep doing it, and
Yeah.
each thread you gotta pull. So it's very time consuming.
I think I can like imagine what you're talking about because there's like a lot of basket weaving methods that are similar. I know kind of a couple things about basket weaving. It's definitely not like a strength that I have, but I have done pine needle weaving, which is what it sounds like you're talking about. I don't know if it's exactly the same.
Pine needle?
Yeah.
Weaving? Huh?
Well, it's pine needle basket making. I don't know if that's the exact term. But you take a lot of pine needles, and it's similar to where you say there's like a thread you're wrapping around it. So you have a thread that's separate, and then you bunch these pine needles together in a way that creates like a rope, and and you just keep on sewing them into each other, and it progressively builds. I can't describe it exactly 'cause I'm not that familiar, but it's all pine needles.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's a practice that like comes from America. Because I don't know.
Oops, sorry. I was gonna say we probably have time for one more question if anyone has another one too. But also I love that everyone's just chatting and
Yeah.
to know each other. But if there are any more questions, we have time for about one more.
Do you think we should do one? How much time is there?
About 10 minutes.
Should we do the activity or should we do one question? What do you think?
What other activities should we do?
I just had a visioning activity, like a closeout, but
Yeah, let's do the activity, close out, and then Amir, you're free to hang around for a few minutes for any last minute questions individually. I
okay.
think it's perfect. We can do it.
Yeah, it's just a quick closeout. It's nothing serious. Nobody has to get up. Let me put on my lip chat. Sorry for that little pause. Okay. So I have two things. This is just like a quick, this is normally how I actually start my art projects. I like working with like very little pieces of paper. I don't know why. Normally this would actually be like, I would take a full piece of paper and then fold it into a book. I don't know if you all have seen that. If someone has, is there a piece of paper somewhere, Chelsea? I should have brought a full piece of paper.
Let me see if we have anything.
Okay, thank you. You can all just take one and pass it down. And then I also have markers.
Hold it in the bag.
You can also take one. Perfect, and we'll just do the activity now. It's very simple. Again, it's just about, I feel like the most important part of art practice is just getting in touch with your intuition.
Even asked us to draw a tree, and I was like, "Did we talk about that?"
That would be hilarious. You can if you want to. We're just gonna have a little visioning, and then if you want to draw your tree, I won't stop you. But I always just start, because like a blank piece of paper actually is intimidating. I was saying that drawing is intimidating. You don't have to draw at the end of this. You can write something. But I always do like to just sit and like think and go into my mind's eye, or like see whatever's happening like behind your eyelids, as they say, some people. But just like really be in touch with your imagination, your intuition, and try to create an image. So we're just gonna sit in silence for a little bit. And I'm not gonna guide anybody. I'll put on a timer. I won't tell you how long. But right now we're all just gonna, you can close your eyes if you feel comfortable. It's definitely not required. I'm gonna close my eyes too, so I'm putting on this timer.
And then are we supposed to draw?
So right now we're just gonna do silence, and then once the timer's up, I just want you all to like react to what happened while you were silent on the piece of paper. So again, it can be a story. I'll explain more later, but. That was it. Okay. So now I just want you all to just, again, react to what you saw or felt for that time period on the paper. And you can do it however you see fit. Sometimes I like a 7-word story if you want to write. Or just like a quick scribble. So I'll just start talking again, but you can continue drawing if you want to. But yeah, that's like a very important part of my process. I also, a quick question, how long did it feel like our eyes were closed for? Just curious about that.
2.5.
60 seconds.
2 minutes.
Okay. I was just curious, because everyone's perception of time is just so different. It was a little bit less than 2 minutes. Just a little bit under. Sometimes I close my eyes for 2 minutes and it feels like 30. And it wasn't one of those.
I appreciate that exercise a lot. Every morning I do like a 10-minute meditation, and then 30 minutes of reading, and get into my meditative habit, so
Yeah.
it's appreciated throughout the day. It's not just in the morning.
Of course, I feel like it's just supposed to happen all the time.
Yeah.
I don't love noise, and the world is very noisy. So I love a little silent moment.
It's our brains.
Yeah. Okay, so I just wanted to show also how I make a small book. I feel like a lot of people like learn how to do this at some point. I just love doing it, and I do it all the time, especially like if I'm traveling and like I go to a restaurant or something and they just have paper, like a menu, like I always fold it into a little book so I can draw on it. But I'm just going, sorry, I had to lick it. You just fold your paper into eighths, so like quarters and then in half. And then it is so hard to have nails. I forgot what this is like. And then you like cut like a cross pattern into it. I didn't know exactly how to describe that. I think this is right. Yeah, it is right. Oh, I didn't need to do something. That's okay though. So you only need to cut this line. This line is not necessary. But you cut this line through it. And then you fold it somehow. Again, I don't remember exactly how to do this, but then you have a little book. And you can draw on it. And I used to do this with like my little cousins. As like a little teaching exercise, just be like, oh, this is how you can make your own journals. And I used to like always do them up a lot. Again, I didn't give good instructions for this one, but this is like very important. Because it's accessible too, again. Like it's like an easy workshop thing to do. I don't know if anyone teaches workshops. I don't know if this information is important. But like if you have people who don't have like, if you don't have a big budget, you just need paper and then everyone has a sketchbook really fast. But that's it.
Oh, thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you all.